Good morning, Kerbonauts. Once again, I am your host, Scarecrow71, and we are taking a look at Kerbal Space Program 1. This is version 1.12.5. Someone on the forums asked for some help with MUN ejection and returning to Kerbin from moons, and I thought it would be a decent opportunity to create a video to try to explain this. I will start with saying I have multiple mods installed. Everybody can see MechJeb and Kerbal Engineer Redux. They are both installed. I'm going to try to use these as little as possible for the purposes of this video because I want this to kind of be sort of a tutorial. So what we have here is we have a very simple basic spacecraft in MUN orbit, right? And here it is. And I'm actually going to, I forgot to do this beforehand, decouple the first stage, right? And then activate the engine on the Dart, right? So all we have here, and we will actually fast forward so we can actually see the craft. Dark side of the MUN and all. That actually brings up an interesting point. Do people call it the MUN or the moon? I call it MUN. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what I'm going with. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, okay, so here out in the distance, you can see Kerbin in the sun. And here we go. Here's our little, very basic craft. It is nothing more than Jeb in a capsule with a fuel tank, a reaction wheel, and an engine. Okay, this is very basic. There's a parachute on here, but I don't plan on landing him on Kerbin at the end of this. So, what we want to do, and we'll pause the game here for a little bit. What we want to do, we'll unpause it, is we want to go from the MUN, right, which we are in orbit, which as you can see by the blue circle, right, this is your trajectory right here, and we want to get back into Kerbin's sphere of influence, right? You can see the MUN is in Kerbin's sphere of influence. It is traveling along this white line counterclockwise, right? And we want our craft to do the same thing. So we have a couple of different options. We can either plan this manually or we can use MechJeb. I am going to plan this manually because I want people to see exactly how this happens. So I will interject here with a little statement of YMMV. Your mileage may vary. What I am about to do may work for this mission, may work for me, may work for my copy of Kerbal Space Program. If anybody watching this finds a way that works better for them, by all means use that. Okay, there is no one right way to do a lot of the stuff here. Okay, so do what you got to do. As long as you're able to get the concepts of what we're doing down, you're all good. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a maneuver so that we end up flying away from the MUN, which will eject us from its sphere of influence, and then ending up inside of Kerbin's sphere of influence, so we can then attempt to, land and do whatever else it is we have to do, right? So what we want to do is I have found that it works best that if I should say, create a maneuver that is on the side of the MUN closest to Kerbin, right? In this case, it would be the light side right now. If I create a maneuver on that side, it should be the least expensive in terms of delta V and fuel to get back to Kerbin. So we're just going to grab any point along the trajectory. Now I know that my craft here, right, Untitled Spacecraft, is traveling from left to right in a clockwise fashion. I know that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a maneuver node behind it so that it will eventually have to catch up. Right, and it doesn't matter where along this path I create it because we can fiddle with it. We can get the best, I don't know, ending perigee or flight path or whatever you want to call it, right? We can get the best that we want, whatever works best for us. So I'm going to just create it at about, if I've got the MUN centered along its axis, I'm going to just do it like 45 degrees, right about there, right? And what we want to do is we want to burn prograde because we want our trajectory to increase going away from the Mun, which you can see has now happened, right? We have a nice gold line. We have a nice green line. And we have a purple line. And I will explain all of these. The gold line is the projected path based on this maneuver. If we were to burn the amount of fuel we're supposed to burn at the time for the amount of time, our craft at the end of the burn will follow this gold path. This is where it will go. The purple line is once we exit the Mun sphere of influence with this maneuver, this purple line becomes our new orbital path. This is the path our craft will travel, okay, at some point. The green line, and this can get to be very confusing, eventually, if we do this maneuver and we get out into orbit along this purple line, eventually, after enough orbits, we will come back into contact with the Mun, and we will end up with a path that brings us back into the Mun sphere of influence. And this would be 43 days from the current time in game, right? So when this says 44 days, 1 hour, whatever minutes, we would end up back near the periapsis of the Mun if we did nothing else, if we just burned this maneuver and then followed this path, okay? And I know that you end up with a lot of lines and a lot of colors, and they can get to be confusing. And, you know, if I scroll out enough, you're like, oh my goodness, there's another big purple. This solid purple line, this is Minmus's orbital path in Kerbin's sphere of influence, right? I scroll out even more. There's this light blue one. That's Kerbin's orbital path around Kerbal, and then Eve and Duna, and so on. Right, so there's a lot of colors, there's a lot of lines, it's a lot of information that the game is trying to display, and it's up to you to try to figure out exactly how it's being dealt. So, in this case, this path, right, would end up taking us way away from Kerbin with its final periapsis. We don't want that. I want this to be closer to Kerbin than way out beyond Minmus. So we start to scale this back in. And notice, I'll get rid of that. Notice that this purple line and the gold line are both moving, because again, the gold line is where you are going to travel, and the purple line is your final path once you've ejected from the Mun. So we're gonna scale this back, scale it, scale it, scale it, scale it, scale it. I'm waiting until it just about that, okay? So now you can see our final apoapsis is only going to be 14 million meters away from Kerbin instead of the 75 that we had before. But we can do better than this. Now, notice I started on, I'll move this, I'll pause this just for a moment. Remember, I started over here on the light side of the Mun, right? The side that's currently facing Kerbin. And that's what's giving us this large orbital path of 14 million. But we can do better than that. We can get far closer than this. So what I want to do is resume the flight, and we're going to move this maneuver node to the dark side of the Mun. Now our periapsis is 11 million. Just by simply rotating it along our current orbital path, we lost 3 million meters. We can do better. I'm going to actually pull this up. All I'm doing is I'm hovering over the prograde marker, and I am using my scroll wheel. And you can see we've gotten down to, I don't know, 10 million, 10.6 million. We can do better. You can always do better. All you have to do is fiddle with the maneuver node, right? move it around wherever you want. If I can actually grab the right thing here. You can move it around. Right, you can swing it where you need to go. You can do whatever you need to do. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're just gonna go back into Kerbin's sphere of influence, right? So we'll leave it at 10.5 million. So we're gonna hit this maneuver node in about 12 minutes, 16 seconds. It's gonna take less than 200 meters per second of delta V to actually do this. But one thing that I want to point out, because this was a very specific question that somebody on the forum forums asked. Does the gold line and the purple line intersect? The answer is both yes and no. So what happens is if you try to scroll in, and you can see that the gold line is actually sitting a little above the purple line, right? So they're not intersecting prior to you doing the maneuver. They don't intersect, but I'm going to scroll out a bit. Okay, so I want you to pay attention right over here. If I hover my mouse over the end point of this maneuver, you will see a little gold circle show up on the purple line. You'll also see, if you look right over here, you'll see the position of the MUN when we eventually eject. What that means is that when we get away from the MUN sphere of influence, that gold circle that shows up over here, that's where we will end up on that purple line, right? Because we go from our current orbit, traveling along a new trajectory to escape the MUN, and then once we get out of the MUN sphere of influence, we end up in Kerbin's sphere of influence along the purple line. That's our new orbital path. Okay, and it's going to be kind of weird because we're going to be moving from effectively north to south, right? It's the best way I can explain it, right, with compass points. We're going to be moving from north to south to get to our maneuver point. Once we burn, we're going to end up moving from east to west away from the MUN, but west to east to get into Kerbin's sphere of influence. It's kind of weird. You have to try to think in 3 dimensions. Think of things in a cube or a sphere and not just linear. So once we do this burn, this gold line will turn blue. This blue circle will go away, and you will see this turn blue because that's our new orbital path. Once we eject from the MUN, once we end up at that gold point over here, that purple line will turn blue because we will have left the MUN sphere of influence and be orbiting Kerbin. So let's put this into action. Now, I cannot do burns very appropriately. I suck. I'm not even going to try to hide that fact. I always over or undershoot, and I never seem to be able to do it right. So I am going to use MechJeb to help me do this. I could have easily used MechJeb to actually create the maneuver node, but I wanted to do it manually so people could see. So all I'm going to do is, it doesn't even matter in the maneuver planner where I'm at. I'm just going to hit execute next node, and MechJeb will take care of the rest. And we sit and wait. The burn's only going to take 4 seconds total. Again, less than 200 meters per second of delta V. We have 1900-ish meters per second of delta V in this craft. This is just a very simple, basic craft that I put together. Now, quiz time. What did you see happen? Well, we burned, and our new trajectory, right, where the craft is now headed, has turned blue. Okay? What else happened? That purple line turned gold. For the same reason that we get the gold line when we plot a new maneuver, the purple line for our new orbital path turned gold, because it tells us that at some point, if things work out, in the case of a maneuver doing the burn properly, or in the case of ejecting from the MUN, this will become our new trajectory. So what we want to do here is now all we want to do is we want to make sure Jeb is pointing prograde, right? And then all we want to do now is we want to just warp until we get to the end of our current trajectory. So we'll just warp to sphere of influence. Scroll in as much as we can. That's as far as I can go, and then the line disappears. Now it'll take 3 minutes-ish to get there. So we're going to speed this up just a little bit. I want to get down to about 30-ish seconds here. Now notice, if I zoom out, you'll see the little blue dot right there. That shows us where we're going to end up in our new orbit, right? So we wait for another 15 seconds or so. Bonus points to anybody who can guess what's about to happen. I'll let it happen before I explain it. And we have entered Kerbin's sphere of influence and left the Mun's sphere of influence. And notice that gold line, it was purple to begin with. It turned gold after the maneuver. It's now blue. Why? This is our current orbital path around Kerbin. Simple. So, in summary, that is an ejection from the Mun to get back to Kerbin. That's what the lines mean. That's what the colors mean. That's what the principles of doing this actually are. You can use this and these concepts, precepts, whatever you want to call them, to return to any celestial body from its moon, right? Whether that be Mun or Minmus going back to Kerbin, Tylo, Bop, Paul, Val, Lathe going back to Jewel, Ike to Duna, Gilly to Eve. You can even use some of these concepts to do a return to Kerbin from another celestial body, right? If you wanted to go from Duna to Kerbin, Jewel to Moho. I don't know why anybody would go from Jewel all the way to Moho, but you can do it using these concepts, right? It's the same thing. It's all the same concepts about, planning maneuvers and what the lines mean and where you're going to end up after you do your burns. So that'll do it for me for this video. Again, it was just supposed to be something simple, something very basic to help people out. If anybody has any questions or comments, concerns, anything that you think I said wrong, right, and you think needs a correction, by all means hit me up. You can either tag me in a thread on the forums, you can PM me directly on the forums, or you can leave comments under this video on YouTube. I do not normally check the comments on YouTube though, so if you do leave a comment at YouTube and I do not respond to it, please by all means hit me up on the forums and say, hey, Crow, we need you to respond. Until next time, I've been your host, Scarecrow71. This has been Kerbal Space Program 1 with a Mun ejection. Take care, everybody. Peace out.